Elvis Presley's career was over after this.
I fell in the bathtub, and that was the day I stopped bathing.
He died alone, face down in his bathroom at just 42 years old. But the tragic end of Elvis Presley was only the final note in a lifetime of heartbreak. For decades, fans saw the king of rock and roll as untouchable, a larger-than-life icon with the world at his feet. But behind the rhinestone suits and explosive stage performances, Elvis was slowly unraveling. And the darkest moments of his life didn't just hint at the pain, they confirmed what we feared all along. Elvis Presley was a prisoner of his own fame. The screaming crowds, the sold-out shows, the Hollywood glamour, it was all a mask for the loneliness, addiction, and personal tragedies that haunted him behind closed doors. From losing the person he loved most, to watching his career spiral out of his control, to battling demons that no one around him truly understood, each of these moments marked another step toward the inevitable. In this video, we expose the 5 darkest days of Elvis's life, each one a chilling reminder that even legends can suffer in silence. These aren't just sad stories. They're proof that behind the crown, Elvis was quietly crumbling. And the truth? It's darker than any of us wanted to believe. The death of his mother, Gladys Presley. The turning point in Elvis Presley's life didn't happen on stage or in the recording studio. It happened in a quiet Memphis hospital room on August 14, 1958. That was the day his mother, Gladys Love Presley, passed away. It wasn't just a personal loss, it was a spiritual and emotional collapse that left Elvis shattered in a way he never fully recovered from. Elvis and Gladys shared an unusually close bond. Raised in poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi, they clung to each other through years of struggle. She doted on him, calling him Satnin, and he adored her in return. When Elvis rose to fame, he remained devoted to his mother, even buying Graceland so they could all live together. Yet, despite the luxury surrounding her, Gladys never felt at home in Elvis's new world. Fame made her anxious. She worried constantly about her son, felt out of place in the spotlight, and quietly began drinking to cope. When Elvis was drafted into the Army in 1958, their separation only intensified her decline. While stationed in Germany, Elvis got the news his mother was seriously ill. He rushed back to Memphis and arrived just in time to see her before her condition worsened. She was diagnosed with acute hepatitis and heart failure, with her organs failing rapidly. At only 46 years old, Gladys died, leaving her son completely devastated. Elvis's grief was overwhelming. At the hospital, he reportedly sobbed uncontrollably, throwing himself onto her body and refusing to let go. At her funeral, he kissed her goodbye and whispered a final, "I love you." Witnesses said they'd never seen him more broken. The man the world idolized was now just a heartbroken boy, lost without the woman who had been his emotional anchor. After Gladys's death, something inside Elvis changed. Friends and family noticed a deeper sadness, a kind of emotional numbness. He became more withdrawn, more dependent on those around him, and less able to find meaning in his fame. Many biographers point to this moment as the start of his slow emotional decline. Though he continued to perform and make films, the spark behind his signature smile had dimmed. He kept his mother's room preserved at Graceland and visited her grave regularly. The pain never faded. It merely became part of him. Gladys's death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the first major crack in Elvis's seemingly indestructible image. It revealed a vulnerability the public rarely saw and marked the beginning of a lifelong struggle with grief, loneliness, and escape. This was the day the king's heart broke, and it never truly healed. Trapped in Hollywood. By the early 1960s, Elvis Presley was a household name, not just as a singer, but as a movie star. At a glance, it seemed like his fame was unstoppable. Crowds mobbed him, his records sold in the millions, and Hollywood came calling with contract after contract. But beneath the surface, Elvis felt something far different. The lights of Tinseltown weren't flattering, they were blinding. And over time, they became a prison. From 1960 to 1969, Elvis starred in a staggering 27 films. To the outside world, it looked like a dream career. But to Elvis, it was a nightmare of creative stagnation. The scripts were formulaic, the roles shallow, and the music uninspired. Gone were the edgy performances that had once shaken America. In their place were lightweight plots, cheesy love songs, and scenes that reduced the king of rock and roll to a caricature. He had dreams of being a serious actor. He idolized James Dean and Marlon Brando and longed for roles that would challenge him. But his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had other plans. Parker focused on quantity over quality, choosing safe, profitable musicals over artistic risks. Elvis had little say in the decisions. He was locked into long-term studio contracts that paid well but left no room for growth. As time passed, frustration took root. In private, Elvis expressed regret and even shame about many of his films. In an interview later revealed in archives, he said, "Hollywood's image of me was wrong, and I knew it, and I couldn't do anything about it." He often walked off set discouraged, sometimes visibly angry, knowing he was being used as a product rather than an artist. The most painful part was watching his music suffer. Many of the songs recorded for his films were weak, forgettable tunes, far removed from the raw, soul-stirring rock and gospel that had made him famous. He wanted to grow, to experiment, to evolve, but instead he was stuck singing about clam bakes, beaches, and race cars. By the mid-60s, even his fans were beginning to notice the decline. His album sales dipped, the films were critically panned, and his relevance began to fade. For someone like Elvis, whose life had once been all about passion and rebellion, this artistic silence was soul-crushing. He was still the king, but the throne was starting to wobble. His personal life reflected this creative rut. He became more reclusive, relying increasingly on prescription medications to manage stress, sleep, and anxiety. Friends said he felt trapped, powerless to steer his own career, unable to break free from the box Hollywood had built around him. The man who once defied norms and electrified audiences now spent his days acting in movies he didn't respect, in scenes he didn't believe in, singing songs he didn't even like. It wasn't until the legendary 1968 comeback special that Elvis finally reclaimed his voice, literally and creatively. But even then, the years of frustration and lost opportunity weighed heavily on him. He had seen firsthand how quickly the industry could suck the soul out of someone with real talent. This chapter of his life wasn't about a single catastrophic event. It was about a slow, grinding erosion of identity. Elvis may have looked like he was living the dream, but for nearly a decade, he felt like a stranger to himself, trapped in Hollywood, silenced in the one place he once roared the loudest. The divorce from Priscilla Presley. By the early 1970s, Elvis Presley had the world at his feet. He was back on top after his 1968 comeback special. His Las Vegas shows were drawing massive crowds and his music was climbing the charts again. But behind the curtains of glittering performances and public adoration, his personal life was beginning to fall apart. The most painful blow came not from critics or career struggles, but from the slow, painful unraveling of his marriage to Priscilla Presley. Their love story had started like a fairy tale. Elvis met Priscilla Beaulieu in 1959 while stationed in Germany during his military service. She was just 14, he was 24. Though the relationship raised eyebrows, their connection deepened over time. After years of long-distance courtship, Priscilla moved to Graceland in 1963, and the two married in 1967. A year later, their daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, was born. But the cracks in their relationship had begun long before the wedding bells faded. Elvis was no ordinary husband. He was under constant pressure, traveling for concerts, surrounded by hangers-on, and struggling privately with substance dependence. He was also known to be unfaithful, often having affairs with women during his tours and film shoots. Though Priscilla tried to adapt to life in his shadow, she often found herself isolated, living in a mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. By the early 70s, the emotional distance between them had grown. Elvis had become increasingly reliant on prescription medications, primarily to sleep, perform, and escape his internal battles. His erratic mood swings, unpredictable behavior, and long absences placed immense strain on their marriage. At the same time, Priscilla began carving out a sense of independence. She studied karate and eventually began an affair with her instructor, Mike Stone, something she later admitted helped her realize how empty her relationship with Elvis had become. In February 1972, Priscilla told Elvis she was leaving him. She moved out of Graceland, taking Lisa Marie with her. Elvis was devastated. Despite his own infidelities, he hadn't expected her to walk away. According to close friends, he was heartbroken, angry, and spiraled into deeper isolation. Their divorce was finalized on October 9, 1973, and though the split was amicable in court, Elvis even walked her out hand in hand. It marked one of the lowest points of his life. After the divorce, Elvis's health and behavior worsened. He grew increasingly reclusive, put on significant weight, and became more heavily dependent on drugs. While he remained active professionally, those closest to him knew he was a man sinking under the weight of loss. Not just of a wife, but of stability, normalcy, and emotional grounding. To the public, Elvis was still the king, dazzling crowds in Vegas with his jumpsuits and swagger, but inside he was unraveling. Priscilla had been one of the few people who truly knew him, the man, not the myth. Losing her meant losing another piece of himself, and that pain haunted him until the end. The end of his marriage wasn't just a romantic failure, it was a signal that Elvis, for all his fame and fortune, couldn't hold on to the one thing he needed most: love. This chapter of his life confirmed what many feared. Behind the gates of Graceland, the king lived a life far lonelier than anyone imagined. The death of his twin brother, a lifelong haunting shadow. Long before Elvis Presley was a global icon, before the screaming fans and sold-out shows, he was just a boy born into poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi. But few people know that Elvis came into this world as one half of a pair. On January 8, 1935, Elvis Aaron Presley was born, 35 minutes after his identical twin brother, Jesse Garon Presley, who was tragically stillborn. That moment, barely understood at the time, would cast a long and haunting shadow over Elvis's entire life. Growing up, Elvis was an only child in the eyes of the world, but deep within, he always felt a connection to the brother he never got to meet. His parents, Gladys and Vernon Presley, rarely spoke about Jesse, but the weight of that loss was always present. Gladys in particular believed that Elvis was a special gift from God, spared to do something great. This belief created an almost mystical pressure around Elvis's existence. He wasn't just living his life, he was, in a sense, living for two. As Elvis grew older, the impact of Jesse's death became more internalized. Though he rarely spoke publicly about his twin, those close to him noted that he often reflected on what life might have been like had Jesse lived. Some biographers believe that this loss instilled in Elvis a deep sense of loneliness and incompleteness that followed him for the rest of his life. He would often say he felt like something was missing, an invisible piece of his identity lost before his first breath. The idea of duality became a central, if unspoken, theme in Elvis's life. On stage, he was a phenomenon, radiant, powerful, adored. Off stage, he was quiet, introspective, and haunted by self-doubt. Some believe this internal split, the performer versus the man, was rooted in the psychological impact of losing his twin. There was always the shadow of what could have been a spiritual twinship that never had the chance to unfold. Elvis's fascination with the spiritual world only deepened as he aged, and many believe it was partially driven by his longing to understand Jesse's absence. He read about life after death, numerology, Eastern religions, and even consulted psychics and spiritual advisors. He often speculated that Jesse's spirit had never left him, that it remained a guiding force, perhaps even influencing his music, charisma, and path to fame. The most tragic part of this silent burden was that Elvis rarely opened up about it. Instead, the pain lived in the background, influencing his relationships, his need for constant attention, and his emotional instability. According to some who knew him, Elvis sometimes spoke to Jesse as if he were still there, particularly during moments of deep stress or despair. It was a private, almost sacred connection he never truly let go of. The death of Jesse Garon Presley wasn't a dramatic event that unfolded in adulthood. It was a ghost that hovered from birth. It shaped Elvis in ways that even he may not have fully understood. His drive to be extraordinary, to be remembered, to live as large and loud as possible, may have all been subconsciously fueled by the need to live for the brother who never had the chance. This chapter of Elvis's life reveals perhaps his most profound and private darkness, the lifelong grief of a bond severed before it began. For a man so loved by the world, Elvis spent much of his life carrying a silent sadness, a hole left by the brother who was always missing and always missed. August 16, 1977, the king dies alone at Graceland. It was a hot summer day in Memphis when the world came to a halt. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor of his Graceland mansion. At just 42 years old, the man who had defined a generation was gone. The news sent shockwaves across the globe, but those closest to him weren't shocked. They were heartbroken, but not surprised. For years, Elvis had been silently spiraling, and that tragic day was the final note in a long, painful symphony of decline. The days leading up to his death were anything but glamorous. Elvis had become a recluse in his own home, battling severe health issues, addiction, and emotional torment. He was bloated, heavily medicated, and barely sleeping. His once electric stage presence had faded into a robotic routine of Las Vegas shows where he often forgot lyrics, slurred his words, or barely made it through performances. Friends, fans, and even his bandmates saw it. The king was dying in slow motion. In the early morning hours of August 16th, Elvis was supposed to fly out for another tour, but instead of preparing for the spotlight, he was locked in his private bathroom, struggling with insomnia and discomfort. Ginger Alden, his then-girlfriend, found him face down, unconscious. Medics arrived and attempts were made to revive him, but it was too late. At 3:30 p.m., Elvis was officially pronounced dead at Baptist Memorial Hospital. The cause? Heart failure, though years later autopsies and reports would reveal a deadly cocktail of prescription drugs in his system. His death stunned the world, but in truth, the signs had been there for years. Elvis's dependency on medication began innocently enough, prescriptions for sleep, energy, and weight management. But over time, the list grew longer. By the 1970s, he was reportedly taking dozens of pills a day: barbiturates, painkillers, amphetamines, sedatives. Doctors, especially those eager to please him, rarely said no. His inner circle, sometimes referred to as the Memphis Mafia, often enabled his habits, protecting him from consequences and keeping his behavior hidden from the public eye. But it wasn't just drugs that killed Elvis. It was the crushing weight of fame, heartbreak, and isolation. The loss of his mother, the breakdown of his marriage, the unrelenting pressure to perform, and the inability to find peace all converged in a slow collapse. In his final years, Elvis was a man lost in his own legend, trapped in a body that could no longer keep up with the expectations the world placed on him. Graceland, once a place of joy and music, had become a gilded cage. He rarely left. He surrounded himself with people but often felt deeply alone. He searched for meaning in spiritual texts, in food, in relationships, and in pills, but none of it could heal the wounds he carried. And when his heart finally gave out, he was alone on the floor of his private bathroom, the most intimate human place. And the myth of Elvis Presley became a tragedy. The king died not on stage, not in a blaze of glory, but in silence. And in that silence, the world finally saw what had always been there beneath the glittering surface: a man consumed by the very life that made him famous. His death wasn't just the end of an era, it was the final, heartbreaking confirmation that behind the legend lived a deeply wounded soul. Elvis Presley gave the world music that moved generations, a style that broke boundaries, and a presence that could light up any stage. But behind the unforgettable voice and electrifying persona was a man weighed down by loss, pressure, addiction, and heartbreak. These 5 darkest days, losing his mother, being creatively silenced in Hollywood, the collapse of his marriage, the haunting loss of his twin, and his lonely, tragic death, weren't isolated tragedies. Together, they paint a picture of a legend who gave everything to his audience and had little left for himself. If this deeper look into Elvis's life moved you, helped you understand him a little more, or made you see the truth behind the myth, please hit that subscribe button for more deep dive stories just like this. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Which of these moments struck you the most? What do you think Elvis would have needed to truly find peace? Thanks for watching, and remember, behind every icon, there's a story the spotlight never shows.